students, let us start with how do traits get expressed. Cellular DNA is the information source for making proteins in the cell. A section of DNA that provides information for one protein is called the gene for that protein. Then how do proteins control characteristics that we are discussing? Let us take the example of tallness as a characteristic. We know that plants have hormones that can trigger growth, and plant height can thus depend on the amount of a particular plant hormone. We have already studied about auxins and gibberellins in the chapter Control and Coordination. The amount of the plant hormone made will depend on the efficiency of the process for making it. Let us consider an enzyme that is important for this process. If this enzyme works efficiently, a lot of hormone will be made and the plant will be tall. If the gene for that enzyme has an alteration that makes the enzyme less efficient, the amount of hormone will be less and the plant will be short. Thus, we can conclude that genes control characteristics or traits. Now, if these interpretations of Mendelian experiments we have been discussing are correct, then both parents must be contributing equally to the DNA of the progeny during sexual reproduction. We have discussed this issue in the previous chapter, that is, how do organisms reproduce. If both parents can help determine the trait in the progeny, both parents must be contributing a copy of the same gene. This means that each pea plant must have two sets of all the gene, one inherited from each parent. For this mechanism to work, each germ cell must have only one gene set. How do germ cells make a single set of genes from the normal two copies that all other cells in our body have? If the progeny plants inherited a single whole gene set from each parent, then the experiment that is shown in figure 9.5 cannot work. This is because the two characteristics capital R and Y, that is small y, would then be linked to each other and cannot be independently inherited. This is explained by the fact that each gene set is present not as a single long thread of DNA but as separate independent pieces, each called a chromosome. Thus, each cell will have two copies of each chromosome, one each from the male and female parent. Every germ cell will take one chromosome from each pair, and these may be of either maternal or paternal origin. When the two germ cells combine, they will restore the normal number of chromosomes in the progeny, ensuring the stability of the DNA of the species. Such mechanism of inheritance explains the result of Mendelian experiments and is used by all sexually reproducing organisms. Let us explain this in a more simple manner. All organisms have two types of cells, that is somatic cells and the germ cells. Somatic cells have the full set of chromosomes, while the germ cells have only half the number of chromosomes and amount of DNA. During puberty or with the onset of puberty, the germ cells are found in specialized organs called reproductive organs. The reproductive organs start producing the gametes or the germ cells, and it contains only half the number of chromosomes or amount of DNA. During fusion, that is between the male and female gamete, so the amount of there is a fusion occurs between the male and female gamete, and thus the original number of chromosome or amount of DNA is re-established. We have already studied about this in the last chapter, that is how do organisms reproduce. Now let us see how sex is determined. Different species use very different strategies for this. Some rely entirely on environmental cues, that means environmental conditions. Thus, in some animals, the temperature at which eggs are kept determine whether the animals developing in the egg will be male or female. This is the case in case of alligators and crocodiles. In some other animals such as snails, individuals can change sex, indicating that sex is not genetically determined. However, in human beings, the sex of an individual is largely genetically determined. In other words, genes that we have inherited from our parents decide whether we are males or females. Most human chromosomes have a maternal and a paternal copy, and we have 22 such pairs. And these are known as the autosomes. But one pair called the sex chromosome is odd in not always being a perfect pair. Women have a perfect pair of sex chromosome, both called X. But men have a mismatched pair in which one is a normal sized X while the other is a short one called Y. So women are XX while men are XY. Now let us see how it is inherited by the children. All children will inherit an X chromosome from the mother, regardless of whether they are boys or girls, because the mother has only X to donate. Thus, the sex of the children will be determined by what they inherit from the father. A child who inherits an X from her father will be a girl, and one who inherits a Y chromosome from him will be a boy. So we can say that it is the father who determines the sex of the child, because father has two options. He can either denote X or Y. Now there is another question we have to deal with, whether it is the mother or the father who is responsible for the sex of the child? The answer is no, no one is responsible for the sex of the child. The sex of the child is determined by the conditions in the fallopian tube during fusion. So we cannot say that the father is responsible for the sex of the child or the mother is responsible for the sex of the child. But of course, the sex of the child is determined by the father. Now, in human beings, altogether, we have 46 chromosomes. Let us explain this further. See, in males, it is 44 plus X, Y. So 44 plus X, that is 45, and Y 46. In females, it is 44 plus XX. That means 44 plus 1 X, 45 plus another X, 46. So during gamete formation, first let us take males. It is 22 plus X and 22 plus Y. And females, it is 22 plus X, again 22 plus X. Now, when the fusion occurs, the result is 22 plus XX, again 22 plus XX, 22 plus XY, and 22 plus XY. Thus, we can rightly say that the probability of having a girl or a boy child is equal. There is a 50-50 chance of having either a male child or a female child. Thus, we can conclude that sex in human beings is controlled or is led by the genes, or it is genetically determined. So thus we have come to the conclusion of this session. Thank you.